Hello boys and girls. Today we're going to read Mr. Busy by Roger Hargreaves. Are you ready? Mr. Busy by Roger Hargreaves. There has never been anybody quite like Mr. Busy. He could do things 10 times as fast as you or I could. For instance, if he was reading this book, he'd have it finished by now. Wowzers, and we're just on the first page. One fine summer morning, Mr. Busy was up and about bright and early at 6 o'clock. He jumped out of bed and had a bath, and cleaned his teeth and cooked his breakfast and ate his breakfast and read the paper and washed up and made his bed and cleaned the house from top to bottom, by which time it was 7 o'clock. Busy Mr. Busy. There's Mr. Busy doing all his things. Now, next door to Mr. Busy lives someone who wasn't quite such a busy person. In fact, a very unbusy person, Mr. Slow. There's Mr. Slow. I like Mr. Slow. If he was reading this book, he'd read it like this. He'd still be on the first page. And that same fine summer morning at 7:05, when Mr. Busy knocked at his door, Mr. Slow was fast asleep in bed. He'd gone to bed for an afternoon nap the day before and somehow hadn't woken up until he heard Mr. Busy knocking at his door. There's Mr. Slow napping. Who's that knocking at my door? He called downstairs. Good morning, cried Mr. Busy. Can I come in? And without waiting for an answer, he went inside. Where are you? He called. Upstairs, came the slow reply. So Mr. Busy went upstairs 2 at a time. Good heavens, he said. You're still in bed. There's Mr. Busy calling on Mr. Slow. And he made Mr. Slow get up. And he made his bed for him and cooked his breakfast for him and cleaned his house for him. Poor Mr. Slow. He hated to be rushed and fussed. There's Mr. Slow sitting down. Right, said Mr. Busy briskly. It's a fine day. Let's go for a picnic. Mr. Snow pulled a face. I don't like picnics, he complained. Nonsense, replied Mr. Busy, and busied himself around Mr. Slow's kitchen making up a picnic for the two of them. It took him 1.5 minutes. Isn't that quick? Busy Mr. Busy. Right, he cried when he'd finished. Off we go. And he bustled Mr. Slow out of his front door, and off they set. There's Mr. Busy and Mr. Slow right behind him. As you can imagine, Mr. Busy walks extremely quickly. And, as you can imagine, Mr. Slow doesn't. So by the time Mr. Busy had walked a mile, do you know how far Mr. Slow had walked? Can you have a guess? There's Mr. Busy walked a mile. See how far Mr. Slow has gone. To his own garden gate. Wow, that's not very far, is it? Mr. Busy hurried back. Come on, he cried impatiently. Hurry up. Hurry up, replied Mr. Slow. Impossible. Mr. Slow, gosh. Right, cried Mr. Busy, picnic time. And together, I think Annie Kay's missed the page. There's a little bit of mess in here. Hang on a second. This one's really hard to turn. Are you having difficulty turning any of the pages? Oh, she got it. Oh, all right, said Mr. Busy. We'll have a picnic in your garden. Wait a minute, though, he added. The grass needs cutting. And he rushed back to the weekend cottage and rushed back again with his lawnmower and then rushed up and down cutting Mr. Slow's lawn. It took him 2.5 minutes. It would have taken 2 minutes, but he had to mow around Mr. Slow, who couldn't get out of the way in time. Gosh. Right, cried Mr. Busy, picnic time. And together on that fine summer day they had a fine picnic. Well, actually, Mr. Busy had a finer picnic than Mr. Slow because he ate more quickly and had most of the food. Mr. Busy stretched out on the grass. That was fun, he said. I like picnics. You do? I don't, said Mr. Slow. Tell you what, went on Mr. Busy, ignoring him. Tomorrow we'll go on a proper picnic out in the country. There's Mr. Busy and Mr. Slow. Mr. Slow pulled a face. And went Mr. Busy, in order to do that and get you out in the country, I'll have to call for you earlier than I did this morning. Mr. Slow pulled another face. See you tomorrow then, said Mr. Busy, and went home and cleaned his house from bottom to top. Mr. Slow is pulling a face because he doesn't want to go on the picnic. The following morning, Mr. Busy jumped out of bed at 5 o'clock and had a bath and cleaned his teeth and cooked his breakfast and ate his breakfast and read the paper and washed up and made his bed and cleaned the house from top to bottom, by which time it was 6 o'clock. He went and knocked on Mr. Slow's front door. Come on, he cried. Time to be up and about. It's picnic day. There's Mr. Busy being busy. No reply. Come on, cried Mr. Busy again. No reply. Mr. Busy went inside and went upstairs 3 at a time and went into Mr. Slow's bedroom expecting him to find him in bed. But he wasn't. And he wasn't anywhere upstairs and he wasn't anywhere downstairs. Bother, said Mr. Busy. I wonder where he's got to. Where Mr. Slow had got to was under his bed, hiding. He didn't want to go on any picnic. Not he. Bother, said Mr. Busy again. That means I'll have to go on a picnic on my own. Under his bed, Mr. Slow smiled a slow smile. What a good idea, he said, and went to sleep, snoring very slowly. Mr. Busy by Roger Hargreaves.